I think what we're moving towards is what I call offensive attrition. But I think we're moving to a stage now where, and we may already be at it, whereas the Ukrainian army starts to deflagrate and crumble, that actually Putin may now have in mind the ultimate territory that he seeks, which is for the security of Russia. So this is all about the security of Russia. It's about Russia's existential threat. And I think it's something you and I discussed about 9 months ago, when I said I thought that a most likely defensive line was the Dnipro and running up to Dnipro and then up towards the north. But also a more maximalist line, I think, is Novorossiya, which includes the extra territories. So I think plan A is to actually continue towards those territories, and there will be a stop. And this is plan B. If diplomacy doesn't work, then they will take a stock check when they've got the 4 territories, and then see how diplomacy is going.
But you know, one of the things that seems to mitigate against that on the Western side, I just showed you what Macron thinks, and you know what he's basing it off of, this 1% situation. Well, there was another piece 2 days ago in the Telegraph, where the British newspaper there, it said that the British Ministry of Defense basically says that it would take Russia 4 years and 2 million more casualties if they were going to completely go to a victory here. They said, according to this, that it would take 4.4 years. It would take Moscow's forces to capture the remainder of the territory that Russia has annexed. Just the number of the annexed part, not all the territory. They would suffer 1.9 million. There's that 1% figure mentioned again, and then they say that, you know, they're suffering economic woes, etc. And the number of months it took Russia to go 6.8 miles was 26, etc. The little thing, though, I put at the beginning of that call out box there, it would, according to MOD calculations based on Ukrainian estimates of Russian casualties. So that number there is just something that's on a piece of paper that's just claiming what the Ukraine side said. And nowhere in this article that I saw did it say anything about the Ukraine losses and how can they hold out another 4.4 years. What do you make of this?
I think it's scandalously bad mathematics. 2 things: there's the maths and there's the intelligence. Time and again, I really encourage all of our audience that whenever you hear a figure or from somebody, find out what the source is. And time and again, sources like this are Ukrainian intelligence, and I don't think it is intelligence. I think it's propaganda. There's that simple bit of maths, which again we talked about 6 or 9 months ago, which is that when you look at the amount of shells that are being fired, which is about 10 to 1 on behalf in the Russians' favor, and yet the Ukrainians are saying that the casualty ratio is 10 to 1 in reverse. It sounds on that logic that the Ukrainians are killing on a ratio, or their ratio, kill ratio is 100 to 1 better than the Russians. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's as one of our commentators said, they've got logarithmic shells, which they obviously haven't. So you know that doesn't make sense. And I think the casualty, the body exchanges. I think the last one, again, I think I was listening to Larry Johnson, who was saying it was 19 versus 1,000. So the figures are sort of 20 to 1. And I think there's been a recent release or a recent piece of intelligence which is not substantiated yet, but which shows that the Ukrainians have actually lost 1.7 million. This comes from within Ukraine, not substantiated, but that figure feels about right to me in the situation, the balance of power. So I think the casualty figures make no sense whatsoever. And of course, what the Russians are doing, what the MOD, I'm sad to say, are doing is they're doing stupid maths. I'm actually allowed to say this because my first degree was in applied maths and physical oceanography.
Well, good.
I can tell you that. I mean, what they're obviously doing is they're actually taking progress rates based on the recent months of the campaign, where the Russians have been pursuing an attritional strategy, and assuming that it will continue even if the Ukrainian army completely crumbles. I mean, it's absolutely stupid. I mean, we already know that their people per kilometre is way lower than they need, and they're having to plug holes all over the place and suffering a significant amount of desertions as well as casualties. So you know, I'm not saying that it would increase dramatically initially, because I think the Russians would be cautious for reasons of casualties. But there's going to come a stage where actually the Ukrainian army will start to give way, and as the water starts to come through the different parts of the dam, then they can move more quickly. But again, I don't think they really mind about the rates. What they want to know is that they're going to get to a territorial situation which suits their security needs. So, none of what the MOD says, I'm sad to say, makes sense to me, whether it be figures or the rates of advance, because they're both based on, firstly, on faulty intelligence, and secondly, on faulty mathematics.
But what do you think is the impact and the believability of leaders like Macron, Merz, Keir Starmer, Maloney, etc., all these other European leaders who seem to be in lockstep on all this stuff because they seem to believe those figures and the logic behind it?
Yeah, I think that's a big problem, Andy, and I think it's a really serious problem, because it's stopping European leaders from actually seeing what's going on, and as a result of this, they're acting against their own national interests. One of the problems, though, is that so embedded is the idea of the political narrative of Russia being the aggressors, and almost all the thinking around that seems to be designed to pick out those bits of the maths or the intelligence that seem to support that narrative, and to ignore the 90% of it that goes against the narrative. So there was a debate recently between John Mearsheimer and a chap called Matthew Syed, who writes for the Sunday Times, which is sort of centre-right. And listening to him, I was just astonished to hear how the narrative was embedded to such an extent that it's a belief. They actually truly believe a lot of this, I'm afraid to say. And when you get people in that situation where they do believe, it's almost impossible to knock them off the target. I mean, I think, having said that, it will happen. They're going to be knocked off the target by reality. I think there's a wonderful phrase which is that when you get some situation like this, the first thing is that people ignore an obvious truth. Next, they deny it violently, and finally, it becomes a self-evident truth which they all agree with. So at the moment, we're in violent denial, I'm afraid.
Violent denial.
Sooner or later, it's going to come home to roost, and they'll pay a significant political price. But I do worry about the quality of military advice to European leaders.
Yeah, and we certainly see it just demonstrated on a routine basis. And it's certainly a lot of that in the United States too, among many of the TV heads that talk all the time and claim to be experts and former generals and all that kind of stuff. Interestingly,
that's our general's platoon, Danny. It's getting bigger and bigger of some of these talking heads, but we need to get and send them off to the front line.
Yeah, let's get them up to the front line because they have all the answers. Yeah. Love to see them demonstrated on the live line of contact. So we'll work on that one. Interestingly enough, if you took the current battlefield realities and on the two sides there, and all you did was pick up and then exchange the leaders and put them on the opposite sides, and everything else is real that currently is real here. If the Western side actually had the advantages that the Russian side had, we would probably be kind of like really putting a finger in somebody's chest, and we would be crowing about stuff. We've been talking about no compromise. This is what we're going to do. But when you look at what the Russians are doing from that position of power, they are actually talking like, hey, we really want to have a way to get this war over with. Here is what President Putin said following the Alaska meeting and how he characterized things going forward.
I want to note right away that the visit was timely and very useful. We discussed practically all areas of our interaction, but first and foremost, of course, we spoke about the possible resolution of the Ukrainian crisis on a fair basis. And naturally, we had the opportunity, which we took, to discuss the genesis, the root causes of this crisis. It is precisely the elimination of these root causes that should form the basis of a settlement. It has been a long time since we have engaged in direct negotiations of this kind at such a level. I repeat once again, there was an opportunity to calmly and thoroughly reiterate our position. We, of course, respect the position of the American administration as well, which sees the need for a swift cessation of hostilities. Well, we would also like that and would prefer to move toward resolving all issues by peaceful means. The conversation was very frank, substantive, and, in my opinion, it brings us closer to the necessary decisions.
Now, we're going to get into what those necessary decisions are in just a second, because there are some very practical terms that have to be agreed upon. Even if you're in the violently, disconnected view right now, before you can get to that acceptance situation, you got to have them identified. So we'll get to that in a second. But what do you make of the fact that instead of, from a position of leverage and power, instead of putting a figurative finger in somebody's chest, he's still saying, hey, it was a good, frank discussion, sharing of ideas. We'd like to get this resolved peacefully. What do you make of that? Is he just setting this up, or does he really mean that?
No, I think he genuinely means it. I mean, I think this is a man who was prepared to come to the Istanbul Agreement in a way which he now no longer is. So I think he genuinely means it. I think as well that he's talking to his own audience, but I would imagine that he's also thinking a little bit about America and thinking about Donald Trump, because I sense that he does understand that Trump's situation is complicated. He's got the Hillary Clinton of this world saying that, sort of joking about his approach in some ways, and that's saying that he's sort of giving in. He's got the deep state probably wanting us to continue as well. He's got the neocons as well in the same situation. But on his side, he's got the MAGA team, and I would imagine most of the American population who want out, and who can blame them? So I think he's sensitive to that. He's a highly intelligent man. And I think that he generally means what he says. Equally, what you noticed was that he said that we too want a quick resolution of the war, but he didn't say how that might happen. And he understood the American position and has listened to it, and that's something which the European leaders have unanimously failed to listen to the Russian position. But I think actually there's an implicit caution in there, which is that this may take longer. This is about a peace agreement, not a ceasefire, so that we have to be patient and get towards that. And he didn't say it, but between now and then, I suspect his general staff have been instructed, keep going with Plan A, because we don't know whether this process might fail. And if it does ultimately fail, then we want to be in a position where we've actually guaranteed our security. And then we can have a conversation at the end of the surrender.